17 days. That's how quickly Israel killed at least 640 Palestinians in northern Gaza after launching a ruthless bombing campaign in the area just a few weeks ago. The mounting death toll comes after Israel unleashed one of their deadliest attacks on Gaza yet this past weekend, killing almost 100 people and injuring 40 in northern Gaza's Beit Lahia. The Palestinian Authority is sounding the alarm with even greater urgency than before, stating that, quote, the occupation army is forcing residents of northern Gaza to either flee under bombardment or face killing in what resembles a circle of certain death. But here's what you need to understand. This isn't just the usual savage, brutal, racist disregard for Palestinian life from the Israeli military. You know, bomb first, ask questions later. No, the truth is that this is far from just another reckless killing spree. It's a calculated, deliberate, premeditated Israeli military plan. It's even got a name. It's called the General's Plan, and it's the brainchild of perhaps the most genocidal member of the Israeli military establishment, Giora Eiland. Yes, you may recognize the retired Israeli general's name from early on in the war when he called for Israel to create a, quote, serious humanitarian crisis in Gaza, marketing it as a legitimate strategy for winning the war. Or maybe you caught his name in the headlines last November when aid groups were warning about potential disease outbreaks in Gaza, to which Eiland responded by basically welcoming an epidemic in Gaza as something that could actually bring Israel closer to victory. So he's a sociopath. And while some people on Twitter insisted to me a while back that he's not relevant, he's retired, he doesn't have any power, Eiland says he is currently advising the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and actually took all of his genocidal suggestions to the Israeli Knesset in September and wrapped them up into what we now know as the General's Plan. At the core of that plan is a two-step process that sounds pretty genocidal on the face of it. Number one, order all Palestinians to leave northern Gaza and say anyone who remains, who stays behind, is a terrorist who Israel will then automatically kill. And number two, make northern Gaza uninhabitable for Palestinians. According to the plan, that means a, quote, full and tight blockade, which includes preventing movement to and from it and preventing the entry of supplies, including food, fuel, and water. Or if you want to put it in more blunt terms, those who remain will have to choose to, quote, surrender or die of starvation. At least that's what was said in the plan's slick promotional video featuring Eiland himself, which also states that once Israel has eliminated all Palestinians from northern Gaza, the Israeli military will be able to, quote, cleanse the areas of Gaza City. Yeah, Eiland and his group of retired Israeli generals put this on YouTube. That's how proud they are of it. And this isn't the first time the Israeli military establishment has given a name to their genocidal military plans. As I discussed on this show a few weeks ago, in Lebanon, the Israeli military is currently applying what they've dubbed the Dahia Doctrine, which calls for the use of disproportionate and excessive force against civilians and against civilian infrastructure in clear violation of international law. So there's nothing fringe about the General's Plan. In fact, after Eiland presented his proposals in Parliament, Netanyahu reportedly told other Knesset members that the General's Plan, quote, makes a lot of sense. And according to an official who spoke to the Associated Press, a former military official who spoke to CNN, and 4 major Israeli human rights groups, the plan is already being implemented. Yes, what's happening in northern Gaza right now is the General's Plan. It's undeniable.
A siege is a legitimate, practical measure that can be taken against enemy, and you can cause your enemy either to surrender or to die in starvation if they refuse to surrender. Now, those who decide to stay there for whatever reason, then this is their choice.
And as horrible as that sounds, the plan in practice is even worse than Eiland has led us to believe. Because from the looks of it, Israel doesn't even want Palestinians to evacuate from northern Gaza. In fact, for the past few weeks, Israel has been finding all sorts of ways to keep the residents there trapped inside of northern Gaza as they continue to expand and intensify their bombing campaign. Mohammed Salha, director of Al-Auda Hospital, and Dr. Rana Salo of Kamal Udwan Hospital told AP News that Israeli troops have been cutting off the roads between Gaza City and the areas even further north, giving Palestinians even less of a way out. Dr. Hussam Abu Sefia, director of the Kamal Udwan Hospital in northern Gaza, tried to follow through with Israel's evacuation order in mid-October, even though Israel didn't even tell the hospital where to evacuate to. But ultimately, those critical patients were not able to get out after hospital staff faced over 10 hours of delays at Israeli checkpoints. And even those who can get out of northern Gaza and can miraculously avoid the aerial bombardment have to also avoid getting shot at by Israeli snipers and drones, quote, firing at everyone passing by on the road, according to an eyewitness quoted by CNN. In fact, all those starving and sick Palestinians in northern Gaza are a sign that Israel has already moved far past the evacuation stage and is well into stage 2, a complete military siege, the starve or surrender stage, meaning no water, no electricity, and no food. Indeed, the UN delivery tracker reports that since October the 1st, only 80 trucks have entered into northern Gaza. Compare that with the roughly 60 trucks that were entering per day in September, a number that itself was so dismal, so pathetic, that it was seen by many as clear evidence that Israel has been using starvation as a weapon of war. And according to the head of UNRWA, Israel has refused to let the United Nations provide any assistance, including food, in northern Gaza since September the 30th. And now, with at least 400,000 Palestinians still trapped in northern Gaza, the Israeli military is only getting more emboldened, more genocidal by the day. Just take a look at this post from this past weekend, where the Israeli army openly bragged about this picture of starved, injured, and rounded up Palestinians being forced out to southern Gaza, where who knows what will happen to them. As human rights activist Josh Kaddish put it on Twitter, the dehumanization in this photo is haunting and reminiscent of nearly every genocide before. And yet the Israeli army, so confident in its ability to commit war crimes with impunity, posted this photo itself, framed as an achievement of ethnically cleansing Jabalia. It's not just human rights activists, though. The former deputy head of Israel's own National Security Council said this week that this plan is a war crime and that Israeli soldiers should refuse to obey orders. So, to be clear, this is our ally Israel doing this with US support, US funding, US weaponry. This is not the Serbs during the Bosnia genocide, though the imagery out of northern Gaza is reminiscent of Srebrenica, as many have pointed out. I mean, can you imagine tomorrow if Vladimir Putin carried out his own version of the general's plan in eastern Ukraine? Can you imagine if Xi Jinping carried out his own version of the general's plan against Taiwan? What would Biden and Blinken say? How would Harris respond? In outrage, right? There'd be more than the odd passing reference to it in the Western media. There'd be non-stop coverage of the brutality, the genocidal nature of it, the sheer cruelty of the plan. Telling people to move or die, surrender or starve. It's as brazenly illegal as it is immoral. But I'll tell you what, if the Chinese did it, or the Russians did it, they'd deny they were doing it. They'd hide their intentions. They'd pretend it wasn't them. But Israel enjoys such impunity on the international stage thanks to the blind support it gets from the United States, that its political and military leaders don't just bomb, besiege, starve, and ethnically cleanse civilian areas. They brag about it. They advertise it. They give their genocide a name: the General's Plan.